All right, we are going to go ahead and get started. We are so excited to have you all for the second half of the day and to be engaging in this really powerful conversation about support for undocumented students in this country. And as you may or may not know, there are more than 65,000 students in this country who are considered undocumented, who are attending our schools, and who really deserve the benefit of an excellent education. And so we are so excited to be able to share with this panel their thoughts and ideas about what it takes to support undocumented students, what's being done right in this country, and what we can do more. And really excited to both have an opportunity for them to share their thoughts as a panel, but also to engage you. And so we will have an opportunity for you to ask questions. So as you're hearing thoughts and responses, please jot down your thoughts and ideas, because we would love to engage you all in the conversation as well. But first, let me introduce myself. My name is Ann Best. I am the Senior Vice President of Education and Leadership on the National Alumni Affairs team for Teach for America. And that simply means that our team works to ensure that alumni teachers feel supported and that we are growing the number of people who make the choice to stay in the classroom, that school leaders feel supported and that we are growing the number of alumni who choose to lead schools in the most challenging contexts, and that we are continuing to approach school systems leadership and ensure that alumni who have the interest in systems have the opportunity to attain a path to leadership within school systems and just general talent support for alumni across the country. So what I'd love to have each of us do as we get started is if our panelists will just share their name and where you're from, what you're doing, your core year and region. That would be awesome, and we'll get started from there. So I'll turn it over to Amanda.
Good afternoon, everyone. Amanda Fernandez. I'm actually on Teach for America staff, and I am Vice President of Latino Community Partnerships for our organization. And that really means that I represent our organization within the Latino community, focusing on increasing the number of Latinos joining the core, as well as improving engagement with our community around educational inequality. And I'm excited to be on the panel because I want to be able to talk a little bit more about our work in opening up the core and admissions to the core to DACA recipients.
Hello everyone, my name is Veronica Palmer. I'm the co-founder and co-CEO of Rise Colorado. As a 2006 Los Angeles core member and just moved back to Colorado, where I'm a 6th generation Colorado native. So I'm doing community engagement and family engagement work in the community that I'm from. So I'm very excited to be back, living 1 minute away from my parents. Very excited about that. And Rise Colorado, how we work with our students and families. We are actually in Aurora, so we are not in Denver, and we strategically picked Aurora because of the gentrification happening in Denver. So because the cost of living is skyrocketing in Denver, most of our low-income families and families of color are being pushed to Aurora. So basically a permanent underclass is being created in Aurora with undocumented families, refugee families, and African-American families. So we strategically picked Aurora because there is such a need to support our communities and families. And being on the ground, we've seen that many of our undocumented students are going without food, they're homeless, and their families have no way to navigate the school system. So that's the value add that Rise is bringing, really bringing in our undocumented families, teaching them how to navigate the school system, what their rights are, and building their confidence to know that they have the right to be involved in their child's education and teaching them how to do so. I'm very excited to be here today to have this conversation, so I feel like there's not a lot of space given to talk about undocumented students and families, and it absolutely has to be the forefront of the conversation to really support our students and families in the way that's needed.
Hi there, my name is Joanne Gama, and I'm a 97 core member. It was placed in the Rio Grande Valley, and I remain in the Rio Grande Valley today, and I'm the co-founder and superintendent of Idea Public Schools, and we have 36 schools across Texas. Majority of them are in the Rio Grande Valley. We serve, that I know of, at least 1,200 undocumented students across our school system right now. And we're really engaged in the work of ensuring that they graduate from high school and that they matriculate to college. And so we'd love to share specifically kind of the work that my team does, and they're right here in the audience. I was like, they should be on the panel, not necessarily me because they're the ones on the ground doing the work. And then obviously right now in the Rio Grande Valley, folks know that we're facing a humanitarian crisis, and we've experienced about 58,000 refugees from Central America, and 70% of them have crossed over the Texas-Mexico border, specifically in the region that we live in, and in the region that we serve. So happy to share about that experience also.
Hi everyone, my name is Tina Fernandez, and I was a 94 Corps member in New York City. I taught in the South Bronx, but I'm originally from the Rio Grande Valley, so I have a connection, a very heartfelt connection to that region as well, since it's my hometown. Currently, I work at Bellwether Education Partners, which is a nonprofit dedicated to helping organizations involved in education reform be as effective as they can be, especially for low-income children. But my work with DACA actually stems from my career as a lawyer. So I'm also a lawyer. I was my last role was a professor at the University of Texas School of Law as the pro bono director. And in that role, I helped, when DACA was announced, myself and some partners and hundreds of volunteer law students organized DACA clinics for the entire first year that DACA was announced, and we were able to help 700 DACA applicants be processed free of cost to students in Central Texas and also in the Rio Grande Valley. And that experience gave me some firsthand experience with undocumented students and the difficulties that they're facing. I also taught 4th and 5th grade bilingual ed in New York City. Many of my students were undocumented in the classroom. And then just personally, I have several undocumented family members who are still trying to navigate their lives here in this country. So I'm really passionate about this issue and happy to share my experiences with you today.
My name is Brian McKenzie. I was a 96 Mississippi Delta Corps member, and after 5 years on my placement site, there were no undocumented kids in Mississippi in my time there. I went to Arizona, and I've been there for 13 years, and 8 years as a teacher in a school with a large number of undocumented kids off and on, and last 3 years as a principal in a small border town, pre-K through 12th grade school, 450 students, and about a fifth of the population lives in Mexico and crosses the border every day. Of course, their residency paperwork says they live in the United States, or we wouldn't be able to serve them. And that's a special problem that we have, not just in Arizona border towns, but border towns in all 4 border states. And it's depending on the community acceptance of the situation, it can be a volatile thing, or it can be acceptable.
So I'd actually love to start with you, Veronica, because you started even in your introduction articulating some of the challenges that families face, and then anyone can jump in, and we'd love to pose the question to all of you eventually. But what are the key struggles in your mind, and based on your experiences, that undocumented students and families face in attaining an education in this country?
Yes, so I would say first and foremost, not having a voice, not even having a say, or knowing where to begin of how to get involved in their child's education. Because they're so afraid to be deported, they're definitely trying to just fly under the radar, not ruffle any feathers. So they know, our families know that their children aren't getting the best education possible, and are seeing that their kids are not on the same level as other children, but are too afraid to go into the schools and ask the teacher, ask the school leader, what's happening? Why isn't my child's test scores so low? What can I do to support them? They're too scared to even step into the school or the classroom to even ask those questions. So just the very basics of feeling welcomed and invited into the school is preventing our families from getting the knowledge and the resources they need to support their children at home, which therefore is just further, continuing the cycle of disenfranchisement and educational inequity, because our kids and families can't even access the system. So that's a lot of what we're seeing, and trying to really work with our school leaders and teachers to professionally develop them on how to welcome in our students and our families so they can have those conversations. In Colorado, there's been many deportations. So ICE is on the ground and is very active, so our families are scared and are very much hiding because they don't want to, obviously, to be deported and separated from their children. So it's that very basic level of how can we make sure our parents feel comfortable and confident in going to the school, and knowing that, ICE will be called on them and they will be deported. So it's those very basic issues of that basic access and welcoming into the school system.
Joanne, I'd love for you to jump in as a systems leader and just share a response to that same question. What do you feel like are the major struggles that families and students are facing in getting an education?
There are a few things. So I think one of the things I think about specifically in education is that it's hard for our students to get the type of academic support at home, specifically if they're in an all-English curriculum or if they're in an all-English school or they're in English immersion. So it's very hard to have a parent who's going to sit and read with you or help you with your AP physics class or other type of classes that you take. The other thing I see is that our students, our undocumented students, have to quickly be leaders in their families. So when they come to schools, they are the ones that have acclimated faster than their parents, and so they're the ones that just truly are having to explain the system or having to explain the way that things work to their families, rather than the families really knowing the system. And so I think that actually you see our students being rising leaders because of that. They're the ones who, a lot of times I remember when I was a school principal, the older brother, the older sister is the one who comes in to talk about the struggles with the younger siblings and then is explaining to mom and articulating the things to mom. So I think those are some of, the disparities that they face that, people that are here don't. Like, I would go and talk about my child's education, or as an English-speaking parent or someone who's just not afraid to show up would have those conversations. I also think it plays out in extracurriculars. I think sometimes our kids and the families, they're afraid to let their kids participate in unstructured activities. They're afraid to let their kids go on field lessons and field trips, particularly if in the border region where we live, 50 miles out, there's a checkpoint. And so one of the things IDEA is really proud of is the fact that, our students visit, 25 to 30 colleges and universities before they graduate. And that's really fearful for parents because they know that they're going to be leaving kind of the region that they live in and never really left or experienced themselves.
Tina, Amanda, or Brian, anything to add?
I think also it's just a basic lack of access to benefits. So undocumented families cannot access federal aid or federal benefits. Things like food stamps. These are people living in poverty who can't access some of the safety nets that we have in our country. It depends on where you live, but for example, in Austin, if a family somebody loses their job, there's a lot of mobility issues because the family has to move wherever the parent can work, and so you've got students that are moving from school to school, district to district. We talked about the fear of deportation and the psychological impact that can have on students and families. And then I think the other thing at the end of the educational journey is that undocumented students who actually have overcome all the barriers and are admitted into college can access federal financial aid, and in many states can access state financial aid. So there are major obstacles to their ability to access higher education, even if they make it through the K-12 system.
And just to add to that, if you're not at an IDEA school, it's hope, right? Because of these obstacles and not being able to see others who have been able to sort of navigate and get through. I've heard that a lot. And I think that's just an emotional response to say, what is my path and my future in this country as an undocumented student? So there's the sort of technical, policy, political things to navigate, but also the emotional navigation as well.
Another factor is in the border region, they tend to face a much longer commute because they have to get across the border, and sometimes there's a line at the border, and sometimes the school's not right at the border, so there's a second transportation hurdle. And the longer a kid's commute is, that's going to diminish their ability to participate in after-school tutoring, to participate in the athletic or extracurricular activities. And in rural schools especially, we have very high rates of student engagement, but not so much with the undocumented kids because of that transportation challenge. Even when the parents are willing to talk to the school, it's difficult with low-income kids generally to get a valid phone number. It's difficult to find translators to talk to parents, and there's I'll stop there.
So I want to talk about some of the most common misconceptions and blind spots we have in this country about undocumented students and families. We hear so much vitriol in the media about being undocumented and what that status means in terms of intention and other things. Would love to hear from each of you all from your perspective what you feel like are some of the most common misconceptions.
I think one that I've seen play out at IDEA is that an undocumented student is a low-income student. And I think sometimes particularly if you live in border regions, a lot of our undocumented students are not low-income students necessarily. And I actually think there are also just a lot of private schools in the Valley, a lot of Catholic schools. I think it's the one place in the nation that Catholic schools are still thriving. And they've got undocumented students there whose family have money and are able to pay that tuition. But I think people automatically assume that, undocumented students are low-income students, and that's not necessarily always the case.
I think one of the things that was surprising to some of my law students when they did DACA work, because in our DACA clinics, we had law students sit across the table from a DACA applicant and help them fill out the application. And so they spent a good hour and a half with that student and their family. And law students who had never really engaged with these communities were kind of a little bit taken, by surprise at how ambitious the kids were, that the kids had dreams for their careers, that the families were there supporting the kids. And so I think in general our country has, negative visions of poverty and what that means and sort of the character flaws that either lead to or flow from being somebody who lives in poverty. And I saw that a lot of my law students, when they had that interaction, were like, wow, this person wants to be a chef or wants to be a doctor. And that was really surprising to some of them.
Yeah, and in the border region where we have some kids crossing every day, a lot of the kids who are crossing are in fact U.S. citizens, they're just not U.S. residents. So it's sort of the flip of the usual situation where they definitely, if you're in New York, they definitely live here, they're not citizens necessarily, and we sometimes have the reverse. The other thing that's generally not understood about so-called illegal immigrants in general is people tend to assume that they all entered the country illegally, when in fact only about half did. The other half of them generally entered legally and are overstaying their visa, and it's the overstaying the visa that makes them quote-unquote illegal.
You said if we had a soapbox, we could, make sure that I think one of the most common misconceptions that you see frequently in social media is that undocumented immigrants are coming over looking for a free ride. I don't think that's the case. I think undocumented immigrants and families, and I think in particular the kids that are coming over from Central America, that parents are pushing and shoving across the border and saying, see that man over there in the green suit, like just run to him. And because you're unaccompanied, they're going to take you in. It'd take a lot for me to push my 7-year-old or my 3-year-old across the bridge and give them to somebody in green that I didn't know. So I'd have to imagine that the circumstances are so terrible and horrible that I know not being with me would be better for my child. And so, they don't come looking for a free ride. I think our students and our families, they work so hard and they do a lot of the work. I personally believe that a lot of other folks don't necessarily want to do. To Tina's point, they don't have access to social services. They're afraid to go to the doctors when they don't have money and they're not going to eat. They're not able to just go and collect food stamps or get free rides. They might not pay income taxes, but they definitely pay taxes every single day when they're shopping at the grocery store or getting their car serviced or paying for gas. Some of them pay income taxes and never see the benefit of it because they're using somebody else's paperwork to be able to collect or to be able to work and to be able to provide for their families. So I think that's a common misconception, is that folks are coming over here and looking for a free ride, and they're not. They're coming over here and they're looking for work so that they can better support their family.
Another misconception that I'll share is that our families don't care, that our families don't have time to be involved in their child's education. Being in family engagement work, that's what I hear over and over again. They don't have time, they're busy doing 5 jobs. It is true that they're busy doing 5 jobs, but they do care and they will make the time if we as educators and school systems just show our families how to be involved and what steps they can take to supplement their children's learning at home. And we've definitely flipped that on its head in Aurora at a few of our schools, where at one school, Jamaica Child Development Center, they used to have about 15 parents turn out to their events, literacy night and math night. After our collaboration with them, they're turning out 80 parents to their events. Like, oh, well, look at all these parents who came now. I guess they do really care. Like, they always did care. We just had to put better systems into place to bring them in, and once they were here, give them very concrete skills and tools and strategies they could then use at home. That's why they kept coming back, because they felt like it was worth their time. So there's a lot of mindsets out there with school leaders and teachers that we really have to start to deconstruct, so they understand the assets that the community and the families have, and start utilizing those assets and bringing them into the school and in the classrooms to really understand our families care, and they have a lot of beauty and strength to bring to our kids in our larger communities.
I think Veronica's secretly reading my notes, because I was just about to get to sort of what are the additional supports needed, and think about this, each one of you, at multiple levels. So what do you think the additional supports are needed at the classroom level, at the school level, at the systems level, and then if you have perspective at the broader sort of state, national level, to ensure that undocumented students can be successful in the education system in this country?
That's an easy one. Immigration reform. It has to happen. I mean, this is this vicious cycle that we're in, and we are not able to access the beauty and the talent of our communities, of undocumented individuals. And what's been really interesting for me to see through our process of opening up admissions to the core, to DACA production recipients, is sort of the exponential talent and strength that is brought to the classroom of those individuals who will be teaching kids. And if that's not enough, as a nation, we are in deep trouble because we're not addressing the problem.
At the federal level also, we need some education reform. Title III, like IDEA, is an underfunded mandate, especially if you're in a small system with a large number of kids who need language support. The funds are not adequate. You need reform at the state level, especially in states like Arizona, where the policymakers frankly wish that they didn't have to serve those needs. I mean, the state of Arizona had to lose a federal lawsuit before it made minimal legal provisions for serving English language learner kids, and the training for teachers is not adequate. We're required to give English second language kids 4 hours per day of intense English instruction, separate from kids who are proficient in English. So they've come up with I mean, it sounds good for 4 hours of intensive English instruction for a kid who needs to learn English. The requirement that they be separate from kids who are fluent English speakers with whom they can practice looks a little like segregation. So a lot of work to do at the policy level. And then, and of course, all that ends up in the laps of the classroom teachers, where real change, is made or not made. And you need people at every level who are invested and see these kids not as problems, but as human beings and as assets.
One of the things, I think about an idea, we have an English immersion program, and we put kids in an English immersion classroom, and you work so hard in ensuring that kids have the language acquisition skills, and they learn so much during the year, and they're doing so well academically. And then kids are sent home for the summer, and they come back to school either in first grade or second grade and third grade, and you're having a conversation with them, and and this is not just an undocumented student. This is all of our students whose first language is Spanish. they come back to school and you have a conversation with them and you greet them and they kind of look at you with blank stares. And I had a student at one of our schools say, pues Miss no hablo inglés, but I haven't spoken English like all summer. In the Valley, in a lot of border towns, you can grocery shop and you go to the doctor and you go to a restaurant and you can survive without ever having to speak English. Like everybody, speaks Spanish to you first majority of the time before they talk with you in English. And so some of the things that we're doing as a school system is because we chose English immersion, we are piloting pre-K at Idea Far, which is our school that is closest to the border. It is less than a half a mile from the bridge. So we're piloting pre-K there so that kids are able to start our reading programs at the same level of their peers who already speak English. And then for schools that don't yet have the resources to be able to offer pre-K, we're starting with kindergartners in June. And so they come 3 months and they're in an English immersion program so that when school starts, it doesn't feel as foreign to them when they're in their English immersion classrooms. And then I don't think school ever really ended for us this summer. There's just a variety of summer school programs. I see some of our counselors laughing in the back. I mean, for our kindergartners as well as like our high school students, there's been a variety of like summer programs because we want to keep kids engaged academically throughout the summer because we know for a lot of our kids, they'll go home and they don't have access because they don't have transportation to camps and things that maybe, my kids are doing. So that's another struggle, I think. And then we get a lot of undocumented students every single day. I have principals who are sending me pictures right now saying, look at the number of families in my office that just got here in one place. And I think one thing that district people, charter management organization, district level folks experience, one of the things that's really tough is when you get so many and how do you place them? And how do you find the right spot for them because they're a 9th grader and they're here and they're ready for school but they don't speak any English and you have to put them in a classroom for a year. You have to provide some type of support to get them caught up and I just think there are a lot of challenges and a lot of different ways to address those things, but it makes it really hard. So you're coming over, you're going to school and you're a 4th grader and maybe in a traditional district they're putting you back a grade or you have to be in this English language immersion program before you can transition into a regular classroom. So it just gets really difficult.
2 thoughts. Something we have in Aurora that they're about to open is called a Welcome Center, but it's only for refugee families. So families from Nepal, Somalia, and Burma. And what I've been questioning a lot is why don't we have Welcome Center? And this Welcome Center has full wraparound services for these incoming refugee families. We actually have a wave of 100 Congolese families coming this next year that we're preparing to support as RISE. But with that, I really think about why don't we have welcome centers for our undocumented families? Obviously, I know the political pieces around that, but we need welcome centers for these families where there's full wraparound services and these students are able to transition then into, their classrooms, into larger schools, but they need time just to be themselves, to feel welcomed and to feel holistically supported. And that's not happening, but something that we're really pushing for in APS, Aurora Public Schools, because this is what our kids need to be successful. And then on a more state and federal level, one of my mentors, Senator Mike Johnson, finally got ASSET passed after 7 tries. So ASSET allows undocumented students to get in-state tuition. Well, that was a huge victory. What we're now finding is that those students who can now qualify to receive ASSET and get that in-state tuition. So an example, University of Colorado Boulder, my alma mater, is now about $15,000 per year. What undocumented students can afford $15,000 per year? Granted, it's better than the $35,000 a year for out-of-state tuition that they used to have to pay, but it's still $15,000 a year. So many of our students who want to take advantage of ASSET can't, because they can't even afford the $15,000 and can't qualify for federal financial aid. So where it was a really great step in the right direction, opened a lot of conversations, it still isn't enough for our kids to get into higher education and attain the excellent education that they deserve. So I'm always thinking about how can we push it even further so that our students who are accepted and want to take advantage of ASSET also have the funding behind them to do so.
And I would just echo that. I think that I agree with everything that's been said. And there are, I think, 4 states in the country that offer state financial aid, and so that's something that would be great if we could see that across the country for undocumented students. And then I just can't agree more with Amanda's statement that what we really need is we need a path to legal status for these children and their families. Because until we recognize their rights as people living and working in this country, then we're always going to have a permanent underclass. And so I think we have to really mobilize to make that happen.
Veronica, you started speaking to this a bit, and I would love to hear other folks' thoughts. What policies, initiatives, either at the district level, school level, state level, federal level, do you feel like have been most effective in support of your work to help undocumented students and families? And then conversely, where do you see things, initiatives and policies falling short of delivering on their promise?
Okay, yeah, so I'm
We're looking experts.
Yeah, so I think that, one of the most inspiring initiatives that I have seen on the immigration front has been DACA. It's not perfect, and we have a long way to go on this, but I think that it was just an incredible initiative at the federal level to say that these students have rights and that we're going to recognize them as individuals in our country. So just a couple of numbers. Since DACA was launched, approximately 600,000 undocumented students have applied and received DACA status. What that means is that while they have DACA status, they cannot be deported. And they also get a valid social security number, they get a work permit, they can get a driver's license in almost every state in this country, and they can also travel within and outside of the United States. So for many students, for example, students who live in the Rio Grande Valley, it's a border region, and to the south is Mexico. You can't go to Mexico because you're undocumented. And then 50 miles north is a checkpoint. So you can't go north because you've got the checkpoint. So you have people who have been living in this, little piece of Texas who cannot go anywhere. And so all of a sudden to be able to free a student to travel and to visit colleges and to just see what else is out there can be so liberating for these students, not to mention students who can travel back to their home countries and just have that freedom to move around. There was a recent survey that went out to students who have received their DACA status, and 64% of respondents report that they feel less afraid. So to think about the psychological toll or the psychological impact of that, right? Being able to say that I don't have that constant anxiety that I might be deported. So that's huge. 70% of documented students have started their first job. So again, another huge asset for these students to be able to work, to engage in society. And we talk about, but they're working and maybe they're not going to want to go to school anymore, but we've actually found that, and with DACA you have to be in school to qualify. So it's a motivation for them to be in school, but also they're helping their families. And it is, it's in some ways it's terrible that you have to take on that burden, but what a blessing that you can be to your families, also to be able to help when you don't have access to benefits in this country. And actually a fair amount of documented students report being more involved in the communities. So as a result of having DACA status, they're able to come out to engage. Many DACA millennials have become politically activated because of being able to have this status here in the United States. So I just think that it's been a very powerful initiative, and what we want is the DREAM Act, but this was a good first start.
And DACA opens doors to becoming a teacher. And so this is my little soapbox moment, and it's probably the proudest moment I've had at Teach for America, working here for almost 5 years. We did take a position on the DREAM Act a few years ago and said all children in this country should have access to an excellent education, right? And that should be regardless of status. And so through that, we've worked really hard to ensure that not only are we talking in platitudes, but actually putting our money where our mouth is. And so about a year and a half ago, we determined through DACA, through the Presidential Memorandum of DACA, that indeed, because of all the opportunities provided through DACA, that there was no reason for us to not open up the core and admissions to the core to documented individuals. And we took an approach that said, we still don't know a ton about what that means though, in terms of what's the roadmap? How do you actually navigate this? What do we tell our regions about? How do you talk to your school district, etc.? But I did have the advice of these wonderful women over here that helped. So we did not advertise. We started talking with national organizations like United We Dream to say we want to do this. How do we get the word out? We are going to identify 10 regions in which we will open up admissions to the core and actually make placements. And we had regions who signed up. Regions said, well, what does this mean? What does it mean for AmeriCorps grants? Well, DACA recipients don't get access to federal funding. So we said, we've got to find money. We found the money, we raised the money, and we're paying for legal support of all the new DACA core members. And what I will say is, through simply word of mouth, we had over 200 some odd applications to Teach for America. And this year, starting school year, we will have 46 documented teachers in our Teach for America. So I am really proud of that. We all should be proud of that because of the stance that our organization has taken. And there's so much more to say after meeting so many of the teachers that will be in front of our kids. So I hope you all get to know them and welcome all of our teachers into our family.
And to build off of that, I had a proud moment for Denver Public Schools, which I'm a graduate of. Superintendent Tom Boasberg has come out in full support of hiring DACA core members and teachers for Denver Public Schools. So that was a very proud moment for me, and I got to meet many of our DACA core members in Colorado, and they are phenomenal. We had an event. Tom Boasberg, Superintendent DPS, hosted an event to welcome the DACA teachers, an event just for them, to thank them for doing this incredibly important work as teachers. So hearing the two core members speak about their experience and how much it meant to them to be able to teach our students in Colorado was just amazing, but then their children got up. Their students got up to talk about what it meant to have a teacher that was undocumented just like them. So in Teach for America, our diversity core value statement talks a lot about profound additional impact. So I've seen a lot of profound additional impact as having been a former MTLD or teacher coach for Teach for America, but standing in that room and hearing these children, one core member students were middle school, the other core member students were elementary kids, and hearing them get up there and talk about what that teacher meant to them and how these teachers openly talk about being undocumented and what that means, sounds like, feels like, looks like in the United States. These students felt like, I have a path, I have a future, and I can do it. If my teacher can do it, so can I. And these students broke down crying of saying, thank you so much, Superintendent Boasberg, for allowing these teachers to be my teacher, because now I see what the future can be for me. It was just very beautiful, and I'm really proud of Teach for America for taking that stance and bringing in these DACA core members, because our kids now see what's possible, and that's what this is all about.
I'd like to share one initiative that we do internally at IDEA. So this year we had 43 undocumented students that are matriculating to college in the fall, and so they face financial burdens that a lot of our documented students don't, because they don't qualify for aid. And so at IDEA Public Schools, we do two things. One is we talk about it. We talk about it with staff members a lot. We've taken a position in the stance that we're going to support all of our students to and through college, not just some of our students to and through college. And so we have a very large staff giving campaign. I remember when I was a core member, there were all kinds of visitors. There was, I can't remember the organization because now I only give to IDEA. But so there were people who would come and ask for donations, and HR would say, don't worry, we'll take it, out of your paycheck. And so, or we're like, well, if we can invite these other organizations in to do that, then we need to be doing this. And so we run a very large staff giving campaign, and that all of the money that we raise, that our staff give back, goes to support college scholarships for our seniors, specifically our undocumented students who don't have the means to be able to matriculate for college. And it started there, and now actually we use a lot of those funds to actually pay for the DACA paperwork. So even after Tina and her wonderful group of attorneys come down and help our students, there's still a fee, $700, $465 that for some of our kids is just insurmountable. So we're able to access our staff giving funds to be able to pay for our students. And in fact, the very first student who came forward and asked Philip, who's sitting right here in the audience, for money to help pay for her DACA paperwork is now employed at Ivy Public Schools and is teaching 6th grade math. So we're also very proud.
I'd love to hear from this group about who you feel are the most critical actors in this work in terms of advocates, activists, innovators, either on a national scale, local scale, in your community, and what you've seen as the successes of their work.
I'll talk. I'm always ready, but I've been told sometimes I just let other people talk, so. That's the lawyer in me. So I have been so inspired by the dreamers themselves. And so I'll talk about this from the perspective of DACA. But the United We Dream movement has been advocating for access to education since the early 2000s. And in 2005, student groups started emerging around the country. And these were undocumented students who were forming coalitions within their communities around the immigration issues that they were facing. And after the failure of the DREAM Act in 2007, dreamers, advocates, and supporters, legal advocates, and community organizers came together, and they decided that they were going to build a coalition. And the goal of the coalition was not going to be just to get congressional votes, but it was going to be to build an immigrant youth movement that would advocate for the passage of the DREAM Act, but that would also change the conversation about immigration in this country. And as a result, so I was talking with my colleagues, what brought about DACA, and there's a lot of reasons, but what most advocates will point to is the fact that these dreamers mobilized, they went to the White House, they went to their legislators' offices, they staged sit-ins, they staged nonviolent protests, they got arrested, they were out advocating for their rights, and they really led to this amazing, really unprecedented result. And so I think that we've been talking a lot at this conference about how do we build a movement, how do we re-energize the movement, how do we reinvigorate the movement. And I think we can learn a lot from this particular example about the role that our students can play in advocating for their own rights. So I think that they have been a critical piece, at least within the DACA work.
You took the words right out of my mouth. The United We Dream. I'm going to point to just a few actors on a national level that I'm really happy to say that they're opening up and identifying opportunities for scholarship money for undocumented. So the Hispanic Scholarship Fund has opened up funding for undocumented students. There's a new fund called the U.S. Dream Fund. Carlos Gutierrez, Donna Brown, and is it Antonio Vargas, I think, is part of it. They have a $30 million fund now that's specifically for undocumented to access money for scholarship. So I think those are critical players in this as well that I don't think are as sort of prominent out there in terms of being local or sort of changing policy or things of that nature, but they are finding the opportunities so that dreamers can fulfill their dreams.
And just to piggyback on that for a minute, almost all scholarships, whether they're from public or private sources, require residency, if not citizenship. And it's a good question to ask why. And ask that of your university, ask that of any organization that you're affiliated with. Why should that be a rule? Because I know that my academic advisor works very hard to find those funding sources that are available for undocumented kids, and there aren't very many of them. And of course, the most pivotal actors educationally are the classroom teachers. Teaching structured English immersion or English language learners, however you do it, is incredibly difficult and challenging work, and we need really good people in there. And as a school leader, don't take it for granted that if it's a department, don't take it for granted that it's working. Right? This is true of special education too. You have to, as a principal, figure out, are they doing what they're supposed to do? Can they show outcomes for kids? And then you need to make changes if not. Delegate, but stay informed.
And there are folks who want to highlight critical players who are making the path more successful either in your community or at a national level.
I think a lot of, for IDEA, I think it's a lot of our school leaders, a lot of our teachers, it's a lot of our counselors, it's those who work with our students every single day and are spending, long hours and late nights and weekends and sacrificing their own family time to help these students apply to college and find scholarship money. For an idea, for some of them before DACA, it was like, who's going to chance it and drive them up to UT? Or who's going to, there are a lot of really courageous leaders at IDEA, folks who have said, I'm going, I'll take them, knowing that, they're putting, themselves on the line, but folks who unabashedly will do that, will take our kids and take them to college. So if they got in and they have the means to pay, or we're able to raise the funds, or we've given them the funds, by golly, we're going to get them to that school. But I also think this is a time, when you ask the question, frankly, it's kind of hard to name folks in the national spotlight. I actually think that's a problem. So when I do think about who's leading the work and who's doing the charge, I do think of students. And I think when I think about it, DACA is like one of the few, policies, like it is tied to education. You have to be in school to be able to qualify. And so the folks that are leading the work, the folks that are engaged in the movement, and when you're looking at articles in the newspaper, when you're looking at social media, you see students. And so, I don't think that we've done enough, the folks in this room, myself, to really stand up and help mobilize the students and help mobilize the movement and say, here are the teachers that are behind this movement, here are the school leaders that are behind this movement, here are the nonprofits that are behind this movement. It's largely a student-led one because they're the ones that are benefiting from the program right now. So actually it's problematic that I'm not able to think of someone right away. When Amanda named those folks and those scholarship funds, and I would automatically think about Tina and the work that she does, but I don't know that the folks in this room could all go and know one person that's helping lead. And so we do need some national leadership, I think, on it.
And I'll get on my soapbox really quick. So I feel like if we look at the most successful social justice movements in the history of our country, they've been led by those who've been most impacted by the inequity that exists. So who led the suffrage movement? Women. Who led the civil rights movement? Dr. Martin Luther King and the African American community. And who led the farm workers movement? Cesar Chavez and Latinos. So if you think about who needs to lead this movement to truly achieve educational equity, it has to be, and who's most impacted by educational inequity? It's our low-income families and families of color, and especially our undocumented families. So I think that's, when I think about it, they have to be the ones leading this movement because they're the ones most impacted, and looking at history, that's how it's going to be most successful. But knowing that more actors and allies and players have to come in to support them. And it's very sad because this panel, we can't really point to certain actors who are leading this movement or really leading this charge with our students and families. Really is disappointing. So it's something we have to think about within Latino leadership, the very large gap we have in Latino leadership, but also just all the allies really coming to support our students and families so they themselves can lead this movement. Like you said, Tina, the dreamers themselves passed the DREAM Act because they did the work themselves. So we need to really empower our students and our families and our communities to lead this movement for themselves. Otherwise, nothing is going to change and this cycle will continue to persist.
And I guess I'd love to pose to the panel, when you have seen communities, parents especially, empowered, unafraid, given the right resources and tools, can you give us some examples of successful activism on the part of the most impacted?
I can give an example. No. The first example that comes to mind is actually one that I was involved in Austin, Texas. And I sit on the board of IDEA Public Schools. And so in Austin, we were trying to form an in-district partnership with IDEA Public Schools and AISD to serve a neighborhood that had had failing schools for over a decade. And we, under the city board, we were able to pass, have the votes to be able to launch this initiative. We were really excited, and we started a school in East Austin, and a large portion of the parents who brought their kids to our school were immigrant parents, undocumented parents, who were not happy with their options in Austin and were excited to come to IDEA. And there was a big political uproar about it, and there was a school board election, and within a year, our contract with the district had been canceled. So that was a real blow to me personally, because I was there on the ground trying to, work on this. But one of the things that was so striking to me was that the parents were so marginalized in this fight. And we had Latinos on the school board, and we had Latino activists on the other side, but these were Latinos who had been here for a couple of generations, who were part of the power structure, and who had political constituents that they were catering to. And I just remember having a meeting where all the parents came after their jobs as laborers and as housekeepers to the school, came to a school board meeting that was 4 or 5 hours long into the early morning hours, and there was no translator. So they couldn't even understand what was going on. It was hard for me to sit there myself and sit through 5 hours of talk with the school board. But then thinking about what it meant to these parents, that they were willing to sit there when they didn't even understand what was going on, and then having them come and tell their story. But they were so marginalized, and so seeing. I think that the gap that Veronica's talking about with parents is really huge, and I don't know that there are organizations out there other than sort of individual schools that are taking this on, that are really activating parents and empowering them to be able to be good advocates for their children. So I think that's a real gap.
And it looked like you were concurrent.
Well, I'm hesitating to say it, but I need to say it. It's a Latino community problem. It just is. And our community coming together around these kinds of big issues that affect our community. We've heard it a few times now. There's no Latino leadership that we can recognize. There isn't a big organization that we can point to, or a person that's sort of leading the charge on these issues that affect predominantly the Latino community.
And I'd love to hear from each panelist before we open it up to the audience for additional questions. Just to your point, Amanda, what do you think it will take to see the uptick that you're talking about in terms of engagement from a full community of impassioned leaders, activists, families, communities, etc.? What will it take?
I think Latino leaders specifically need to lead. And so I want to share a really quick story. So in the fall, have you guys ever been to a conference and you hear someone speak and you're like all fired up, you're like, I'm ready to leave this conference, oh my God, I'm going to change the world. So I had that experience in the spring when I went to speak at the Mexican American School Board Members Association. So I thought, this is awesome. It's going to be all of these Mexican Americans who serve on school boards all across the nation. They were meeting in McAllen, Texas. They were convening. I was speaking. It was awesome. And the person who spoke before me is actually one of Tina's former students, and I didn't know this until I was telling Tina how fired up I got. Her name was Frances Valdez, and she works at Neighborhood Center in Houston. She's a short, little Latina, and she's an immigration activist and an attorney, and she's in front of these school board members, and it's a packed house, and she's talking about undocumented students and how we need to do a better job serving them, and she's giving very simple tips to these school board members, things that they need to do. And she's like, one, you need to make it a safe space so that undocumented students know there's someone in the school that they can talk about their status with. And she gave tips. She's like, the students are using the symbol of the monarch butterfly. So, have counselors wear a little pin of the monarch butterfly. Post the monarch butterfly in the classroom. And like, students who are activists or involved in this are to know, like, wow, that's the symbol here, I can talk to this teacher. Very simple. And I was like, yes, butterfly. Every single IT classroom. Do it. Like, tweeting our marketing person. And then she's saying, like, this is tied to education. She's like, and these students are coming back to the schools and they're saying, I need my records. I need my records so that I can submit them with my DACA paperwork so that I can get, this status. And they're having a really, really hard time getting districts to process their paperwork and give them their paperwork fast enough. And I was so fired up. I was like, no, so much shit. As a charter management organization, we're probably not the best in terms of records, right? So I'm like, records. Like, we're gonna be good to go. And like, I was like fired up. I'm like looking at her and like turn around and look at everybody. And I just felt like every person, tweeting and just like not engaged. And she was so inspiring and she was so impactful. And I like had this list of to-dos that we were gonna go back and do it up. I did public schools, and I felt like all of these folks who were like leading the charge, who like, ideally you run for school board because like you believe in the belief, like you have a belief in all kids and you want to do something about it. And like, no one was fired up. I had no, like, it was clear no one was going to leave that room. No one was going to do anything. And to Tina's point, like, this was like my community. These were like people I knew, like in this room, and they weren't fired up and they weren't passionate. They weren't passionate about this. And I think to myself, I think of my own in-laws, and when my father-in-law probably, or my mother-in-law felt like leaving here. I think about my grandparents, like so many of the Latinos in the community, like we don't have grandparents who immigrated from Ireland thousands of years ago. We have like grandparents who, tias and tios who like integrated 10 years ago. Like this is very fresh in our mind, and we're just, as a community, we're not embracing it, and we're not mobilizing, and we're not doing anything to support our kids.
To me, and why we founded RISE, to me it's going to be a bottom-up change. I'm sorry we waited for too long to hope that these leaders get it, and if they somehow make a change, I've been waiting. So we're really going to develop our families to be the leaders. We're going to provide our families the leadership development tools they need to someday run for school board, city council, sit on district committees, so they themselves have a seat at the decision-making table, so they can make the decisions that are best for themselves, their children, and their communities. So that's how we're developing our families, and I'll share a story about one of our parents, Jose de Santiago. He came from Mexico when he was 14. He has 3 children, and after coming to one of our parent opportunity gap nights at Laredo Child Development Center, he said that it changed his life. And I said, Jose, how could 2 hours change your life in one of our workshops? And he shared being a Latino male and seeing no other Latino males in attendance at that workshop gave him the real realization of what is going on here. How come I'm the only man in this room? And how come I'm the only Latino male engaged in my children's education according to the attendance right now at this workshop? And then after we broke down the statistics for him from a macro to a micro level of what's happening with educational inequity, he realized, and he said that after that night, I went to Walmart and bought every school supply I could, flashcards, markers, pencils, whatever I could, to support my children's education, because my Latino children will not be another statistic. I myself was a statistic. I'm undocumented, but that will not be the story of my children. And now seeing Jose being active in our community organizing coalitions, he is actively bringing parents from all over the place, from his job, from the school. He says to them, you need to learn more. We need to do better for our community. So Jose himself is now a leader, bringing families and educating them himself, and is that leader now in the Latino community for Laredo to show families what's possible. So RISE, we're the conveners in providing our families this leadership development, but our families themselves are going to do this. And Jose is just a beautiful proof point of that. And his wife Isabel is very shy and didn't want to come to the meetings at first, but he assured her, Isabel, you have to come, because if something happens to me, you have to lead this charge for our family. So he's also empowering the women in our community, starting with his own wife, to see why it's so important for Latinos and our parents to get deeply and profoundly engaged in their children's education. So for me, it's going to be bottom up, and our families are going to make the changes, because we can't wait for the top leadership to do it anymore.
At this point, I want to open it up to you all for questions. We don't have a mic for you to come to, but we're a small enough group that if you project, we can hear you. If you've got a question you want to direct to a particular individual, please do that. If you've got a general question, I'm sure each person who has some thoughts on it will take a moment to respond. So questions. Go ahead.
So my name is Jennifer Bacon. I'm manager of alumni team in Colorado, so I'm just completely going to claim Roger right now. But that being said, I guess I kind of want to do a couple shout outs and then maybe some sort of like call to action or something. So first, I was listening in regards to when the community are doing some things, and I identify as African American. When I first moved to Denver, I found an organization called who works on, this issue, immigrant student rights, as well as, some other things. And I think what's really interesting for me in coming to Colorado is that we do have some great examples of coalition building in some seminars, but I think in listening to this, and it's something that, I want to kind of pose to people in the audience, it's like, what's happening in your state? Can we make some sort of network? And so I also want to shout out Anna because she's awesome. She came to visit Colorado and has one of our DACA core members who's an intern for us working on, if I'm wrong, please tell me, but it's like a resource book, like what are the immigration laws in each state that we hopefully share with the, 35,000 people that are in America. And so I just wanted to put out there what's going on in Colorado, and if you all would love to learn more about what's happening in our state in regards to resources for ideas to go somewhere else, or love to hear from you all what's going on in your state so that we can bring that. I know for someone who didn't identify in the community, it was really important for me to know that if there's like a pamphlet or something that I can, use as a teacher to help our students, that's what I wanted to love into, because the issues aren't particularly for me. I grew up in Miami and it's a different scene, right? But had I not been able to my colleagues, I wouldn't have been able to help my students. And so one example of what we've also done in Colorado is we have one coalition called HEA, it's Higher Education Access Alliance, and they are a coalition of 150 organizations that came together to pass an asset bill in Colorado, which makes undocumented youth are able to go to college at a state tuition rate. And the other, and we'll look into that also, is a summit in Denver called Keep the Dream Alive, in which they are training high school teachers and counselors on how to support undocumented youth in going to college. Like everything from DACA to scholarship applications to, we don't have a monarch, but we have a pyramid that this is a safe space, and that's kind of taken off in Denver as well. But because, I didn't identify, I had 2 or 3 kind of organizations in which I was able to go to 5 high schools and say, hey, put this picture up in your window, I'm honored, right? And that these are the resources for you all, and I'm just one person, right? And so I would love to know from you all if there's anything going on in your regions where, and I say to everybody, come to Colorado, please come to Colorado. Right? And I just want to throw myself out there, and I'm putting Roger out there because I do it all the time for, as a resource to you all if you want to learn.
I've been to Colorado.
Yeah.
Okay, I would love to give the audience an opportunity to respond. If there are folks who want to quickly shout out something great that's happening in your region so that you can make connections afterwards, we'd love to give you an opportunity to do that.
I teach pre-K in Spanish Harlem in New York City, and I'd love to hear from you any recommendations for organizations that you feel are really strong. Most of the students in my classroom, their families are undocumented, so hearing from you about New York City is it's different, obviously, from many of the communities that you work with down south, but I'd love to hear from you if you have any knowledge of the New York City scene, anything that I can recommend to connect with you.
Well, both comments are just making me think that we need to set up a Teach for America page for all our teachers who are working with undocumented students, where we can, link to links and resources and organizations and, immigration resources as well. I don't know.
Some access to resources.
Yeah. So if we could, even if that could be something that comes out of today's session, I think that would be amazing.
Amanda, do you want to speak to that?
Well, and to your point, I am privileged to have Gareli Saraga working with me this summer, and her charge is to build a resource center, and we'll have actually someone running DACA who will be working with me as well, whose charge will be to build a resource center that will be accessible. And we can make it accessible, obviously, to alumni. So that resource center has started with the regions that have the placements, but I think our job is to expand that and of course have national type of resources that are available as well as in-state type of resources. So we are building that out as we speak. So it is in motion. It's just, I hadn't thought of sort of this format being sort of the opportunity to expand the involvement of so many others. So thank you.
Other questions? Go ahead, right here.
Lisa Smith, how do you balance doing the work you do and being still culturally sensitive to the families that you're working with, and kind of navigate that beyond just speaking the same language? I mean, obviously right now we're speaking about Spanish-speaking families, but we also have a lot of families that are refugees that don't speak Spanish that still, have this big cultural piece to them, and they're trying to get education as well.
Do you mean if it becomes how do we become culturally competent around the education piece, or?
Yeah, I mean, how are you culturally sensitive in the work that you're doing?
So at RISE, for the refugee communities we work with, it actually happened very organically. They approached us and asked us to work with their community. So Aurora Public Schools has family liaisons for Nepali and Burmese families, not for Somali families. She quit and they haven't replaced her. These folks only work part-time to support 300 families. The Nepalis are the largest community, they're 300, Burmese is 200. The long story short, these community leaders came to us and asked us to partner with them. And that was for the Nepali community. For the Somali and Burmese community, we found community leaders that were very respected and wanted to do this work, and we empowered them, and I professionally developed them to facilitate the sessions. So they translate everything into the family's native language and facilitate the workshop in the family's native language. So the families are hearing from a respected community leader that they love and trust in their native language about the opportunity gap and how to navigate the school system. And for our Latino families, we always make sure that every session is in Spanish and that they're hearing it from a respected teacher at the school or within the community, somebody they can really trust and go there with. Ask really intense questions about why is X, Y, and Z happening? How do I navigate X, Y, and Z? So we really bring in people from the community that represent and reflect the community to talk to our families. So that's absolutely culturally relevant and culturally responsive to our families, because that's what they deserve and no less.
I think, just to add one thing, I think and part of it is you just have to be vigilant and aware and a good listener, and apologize when you misstep, but just come from a place of really trying to understand somebody else. But there are some tricky issues, like the language acquisition is a very tricky issue in the Latino community. So at IDEA Public Schools, we do language immersion, and our goal is to get the kids, being comfortable in English, because that is the language of power in this country, right? It may change, and I think all of us would love a place where bilingualism is fully embraced, right? But the tests that they have to take are in English. So we do English. And what's interesting is that what I found in Austin is that our new immigrant parents are really on board with that fast English language acquisition, because they get it, right? They feel the barriers that they have in their own lives when they can't speak English, so they want their kids to get that language really quickly. You start talking to second-generation Latinos, Chicano, people who are politically activated around language, and that model is offensive, right? That we're not doing bilingual all the way through, and that we're not, a dual language school. And so we have to be really careful around those issues and understand that, that Latinos are not a monolithic group. We have shared experiences, but people have different ideas around certain things, and so I think it is tricky to navigate some of those issues.
Go ahead, you've got a question on that.
Actually, I was going to ask how to do about the team you just spoke to. My name is Caitlin. I'm a Dallas and I'm a member, and I taught in a first grade classroom. So So we did everything in Spanish except for math, and then once I got to second grade, they transitioned into the ELA. I appreciate what you just said, and I also feel like there's kind of another gap being created simultaneously around multilingualism. Affluent kids are being taught Spanish in preschool along with Mandarin or Hindi or some other language, and it's being done very beautifully. Yet our native Spanish speakers, in a lot of cases, their Spanish isn't being supported in an academic way. Now, I learned that for your brain to acquire language, it's best to like deepen your L1 content, then transfer it over to L2. But that was also the model we were using. I'm not a fan of any models, but I think that this needs to be addressed simultaneously and not separately, because for me, letting all children have a quality education means supporting their education in the language that they're going to have support for at home, and it's actually going to activate their brain in the richest way. So, Tina, it seems like, do you think this fight maybe becomes secondary, or do you see this happening simultaneously, not only advocating for undocumented students, but advocating that their education happens in a way that supports their Spanish, so that when they're sitting in an 11th grade Spanish class, they don't have the worst grammar in the place? I don't know if you guys can.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent point, right? I think you make an excellent point, and I think it's a really, so ideally, yes, right? Ideally, our kids would be learning Chinese and Spanish and English and being supported in their language, and we would have the resources in our schools to be able to talk to parents in the language that they speak, and, you know, they could support their kids. So that is an ideal. You know, tend to come from a pragmatist sort of what's the most we can do with the resources that we have. And so it's a really, my mother's from Mexico. I'm bilingual, I speak Spanish and English. My kids speak a little bit of Spanish, and that bothers me, and so we're working on that now. But, for me, I felt like I wanted to develop their 1,000 words before they got to kindergarten, and I have a better vocabulary in English. And so that was, so I had to make these trade-offs, right? And so I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. Well, I think there's the ideal answer, and then there's the question of how do we do with the resources that we have. And I definitely do not know what that answer is, but I do think the language piece is very, it's big. And in a lot of the pushback we got in Austin was around the language piece, because we had a model that was different than a dual language model that was also being promoted. So, I think it's something that we need to be aware of and work through as an education community. But I'd love to hear other people's thoughts on that.
I was just about to say we've got time for one more. I'm so sorry from the audience.
Well, Paula Garcia, RGB90 core member. I just want to have more of a thought, and I want to thank both the American panel for just giving us the space to talk, because the thing that I was sharing with Philip right here is that it's such a polarizing, not only in terms of the politics, but even internally, culturally, and the fact that we cannot think of a Latino leader really disturbs me and bothers me. But I was also sharing that if I were to tell my father, I'm going to take this cause and I'm going to lead the charge, he would tell me, "Estás mensa? Like, why did we come to this country? Your goal was to separate yourself so much from the perception of illegal, assimilate, and be successful." And I think I'm personally wrestling with that right now, because I think that coming here, I'm like, yes, I fundamentally believe what I believe, and that's not going to change. But at the same time, knowing that I have peers and colleagues who don't feel the way that I do. And even in my own home, that might be something that we have to wrestle and educate. So what I'm thinking is, we need more of the space to talk about our internalized racism and so institutionalized and so carefully, because I do want to separate myself as much as I can, because I want to be a successful Latino woman in the United States. But right now, I'm carrying my passport with me, because I don't want to be detained or stopped by anybody green. But that's just because of where I live. So I think that we need to continue the space. We need to continue talking about it. We need to address these bigger issues, and we need to find leaders that are Latino that are going to assume the awesomeness of the position that they have.
We're not doing that.
And continue that work, because that's what it's going to take. I think it's dealing with all this internal struggles that we're dealing, within our family, within our own community. And I think that's where a lot of people that are in the Latino community, who are high profile, who have leadership roles, and I'm thinking they're thinking the same thing that I'm thinking. Is you're really going to go on the ledge for something that your family taught you to get away from as much as you could. Now, and it's going to be perceived as going backwards, so it's not that.
I'm going to pose one final question to each of you that I would love for you to just give your thoughts to as we wrap up, and that is, where do we go from here? An easy one, a softball. Here at the end. And I'll give you a second to think, and then I'll let you know, Amanda, that we're going to start with you.
Well, where do we go from here? In about 15 minutes, I hope you go to Salon 7, where we're going to take on an even harder conversation about the unaccompanied minor crisis in our country. And it's so obviously closely tied to this conversation. So that's actually a really short-term next step that I'm promoting, because I do believe that as a Teach for America community, we need to figure out if there's a response, what that response is, and what is our potential responsibility. Obviously, from an education perspective of many unaccompanied minors in their education, who undoubtedly Teach for America teachers or alumni will be teaching. So that's my immediate next step.
Veronica.
I would say for me is to think about at all levels, whether we're in the classroom or running CMOs, whatever we're doing, whatever sector we're in education, just really ask ourselves, how are we including and engaging our communities and families so they themselves are empowered to have the tools and knowledge to take on this movement for themselves and give them voice and power to be the decision makers that they deserve to be for their children's education. And secondly, I just look at this room and it's pretty empty, in my opinion. And that's actually very upsetting to me, because this is a huge issue. As I shared in the beginning, I'm excited to have this conversation. I'm excited that Teach for America gave us the space. Then I'm saying to myself, where is everyone? Looks like this room was set up for, I don't know, 100 people, maybe more. But we're not even halfway filling this room. So it makes me think, on one hand, do other people feel like this issue is important? Or maybe they're tired because it's been a long 2 days? I don't know. But to me, this place should be packed right now, because everybody should be thinking about this. If our Latino students aren't getting the support they need, everyone fails. Just like if our African American students, our refugee students, everyone will fail if these students aren't getting the support they need. And I look around this room and I'm not seeing a lot of diversity either. To me, I'm saying, where are African American folks? My husband's African American, and we have very serious conversations about what does it mean to be Black from the South, he's from Georgia, and what does it mean for me to be Latina from Colorado. And I'm just really disappointed to see the lack of people here right now, and it just makes me want to charge us all to say, let's bring more people to this conversation, let's bring more people to the table, because we cannot solve this by ourselves if all of us aren't doing this together. Jen Bacon speaking, as an African-American woman taking up this cause, it's about all of our kids. These are our kids. It's not those kids, it's not their kids, these are our kids who are coming. So more people need to be at this table and at this conversation. So as an immediate next step, please bring more people with you to Salon 7 to have this conversation, because more people need to be part of this. This is really disappointing to me right now.
Go ahead.
So where do we go from here? I think we lead, I think we advocate, I think we organize, I think we stop asking the state, what are you going to do? And we stop asking the federal government, what are you going to do? And we stop asking Teach for America, what are you going to do? And we start asking ourselves, what am I going to do about it?
Yeah, I would agree with that. One of my goals after I leave this conference, I've been motivated to do some reading on social movements in history and what has led to the success of the ones that have succeeded and who have they been led by. And there's a couple of things that come to mind. My son, who's 13 years old this year in his history class, told me, Mom, we've learned about the great man theory of history. I said, okay, what's that, the great man theory? And I said, what about the women? He's like, no, what it means is like, he said, no, what it means is, where there's like a great person that leads a movement and that's how things get done. And that's one theory of history, right? But another theory is that there is no one person that makes social change, right? It's the group, it's the coalition, and especially for Latinos, we're all about the family, right? So I think that one thing that we need to do, to your point, is to continue this conversation and to continue to have the space within Teach for America to talk about this issue and to build our coalition of people who can help each other, who are fighting the fight, everybody's in their place, but who are thinking about what are our goals around undocumented students, around immigrant kids, around educational equity, and how do we do that together?
And just to piggyback on that a little bit, I think the coalition building is the most important thing, and that sounds big and scary, and I don't have time for politics and organizing and stuff. Maybe you do and you just don't know, but we're all organizing all the time in the relationships we have with all the people that we encounter, and nothing gets done without a coalition, right? Slaves didn't free themselves. Women couldn't have given themselves the right to vote. Only people who have the right to vote can do that for someone else. And the civil rights movement also doesn't work without allies outside the African American community. And so we need to look at building a broad coalition. If we just organize Latinos, we're not going to get it done. Well, maybe if demographic trends continue. I don't want to wait that long. And that's my last point, is we can't wait. We can't think about 30-year timescales and century timescales, because the kids are here now. And they need an education now.
Please join with me in applauding our appreciate you facilitating our ability to just engage in this conversation and think. And again, excited to continue this conversation in Salon 7. So please do go and do grab a friend to go with you to continue the dialogue. And thank you so much for being here today.